Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to today's first story, about how OP's father sold her to a sheikh for money. But years later OP took her revenge by not saving his life and leaving him on his deathbed. Now story. My father sold me to a family in Dubai, and for that, I will never forgive him. I had to stay in a foreign country, missing my family, and scared that one day, I would not have any use for the family anymore. But the strange thing is that karma will always come for those who do evil deeds. I have not told many people this little fact about me, because I do not want them to look at me differently, but I thought I would share just how much family members cannot be trusted. I come from a small village in Kenya, born in an extremely poor household where going to bed hungry was common. I had 5 older siblings, very close in age, and my mother was pregnant with another child by the time I was 15 years old, in 2005. There was nothing special about me. I went to the village school, and did moderately well at school, but there was no money. Therefore no future for me. I was most likely going to end up like my mother with a husband, who gambled the little money they had every chance he got while the kids starved. It all changed when one day, visitors came from overseas. They were European doctors and volunteers who had come to offer us basic health care. My entire class had to have tests done, which was both exciting and scary because I was scared of needles. But the weird thing was that my parents had to be called in when my results came back. We all thought that I was sick, or something was wrong, because no one else had been called in. I will never forget the day that I found out I had golden blood, which is the term used for Rh-negative blood, which a very small amount of people in the world have. The doctors said that I could save many lives, and my dad asked if we would get paid for my blood. My mother quickly shut down the idea and said no child of hers would be drained of blood. Later on, they had a very big argument. I did not hear much of it, but I knew it was me. The matter was never spoken about in the house, but my dad said that my mother was simple-minded. It did not change anything for me, even though they called me special and said my blood was very rare, and would be able to save many lives. A long time went by, and the doctors had already left when my father came to fetch me at school in a car. It was strange because my father did not have a car. He said that we were going to visit a very good friend of his. After that, we went to a very fancy hotel, where I was given a lot of food while my father talked to the man, who was not Kenyan because of his complexion. Then, Dad told me that they needed a little bit of my blood, just once, but I could not tell my mom. In African households at the time, a father's words were obeyed over a mother's, so I knew I could not tell her anything. I believed him stupidly, and they drew my blood and we went back home. My father reminded me again that I could not tell my mother anything. He said that he was getting paid a lot of money just for a little bit of my blood, and we would never have to see that man or his strange doctor again. It was all a lie. I do not remember how much time passed, but we went back to see the man again. He looked very happy to see me and my father. From what little English I knew, he said that it was a success. Someone came to take me to another room, where I had to stay for a long time. I waited and waited for my father to come and fetch me, but they told me to lie after lie and gave me more food. Then, my father did come to see me, but he was not there to take me back home with him. He said that my blood had helped someone who was dying, and the money was going to keep our family fed for a while. I was happy about that but still wanted to go home, but he told me that I could not. They needed more of my blood to cure the son of a sheikh in Dubai. My father told me that he was sorry, but I was going to have to go with those men. I was missing home at this point and just wanted to be with my family. His sick explanation was that because I was saving the little boy's life, I was also saving my family from hunger. I tried to run away and start fighting, but my father left. Then one of them put something over my mouth, and I fainted. I woke up in a strange place filled with sand, that I now know to be Dubai. I would stay in Dubai for 6 years before I went back to Kenya. The sheikh was a powerful man, whose 10-year-old son had a life-threatening blood disease that could not be easily cured. He responded well to my blood that they gave him in Kenya, which was when my father made a deal to sell me for a lot of money. The family was frightening, but I was told that they would only take my blood here and there. Then I would have a normal life. They said that I could only go if the boy died or he recovered, but they would pay me a lot of money, and I would never tell anyone what happened. I am breaking that rule now, but I did not mention their name, and no one would ever guess it anyways. Very few people knew that I was keeping the boy alive, and the blood transfusions were done regularly, otherwise I was left alone. I had a tutor who taught me at home, and I also helped around the house. I started with kitchen and cleaning work but ended up being one of the assistants by the time I was 18 years old. I did not try to run away. I knew I would never make it out. I had been shown a map the very first day and told how if I tried to escape, I would be sent to prison because I did not have refugee papers. I did not try to look for my family. There was not even a phone number for me to call and let them know where I was. My language started to fade away, until all I knew was English and Arabic, for there was no one to speak my language to me. When I turned 18, the sheikh was impressed with my hard work and allowed me to do a course, so that I would be able to work at one of his malls as a manager, but there were rules. I had to have a very strict diet, no friends outside of the other servants, and I could not stay alone. As soon as I got out of work, I had to go back home. Some days I would be pulled out of work because his son would not be feeling well. On others, I would stay at the hospital with him because his life would be in danger. They were a wealthy, dangerous family, but they paid their debts. I was paid a good salary, and every year, money was put aside for me for when I would be allowed to leave. The boy was nearly always sickly, and I did not have a friendship with him, as he was my superior. The only thing that tied us together was my blood. But in the next 3 years, he drastically grew better and required less and less of my blood. I hoped that he would get well soon so that I would go back home. I missed my family, but there was someone else I could not wait to see with my whole heart. I had not forgiven him for selling me off like I was an object. He was my father and was supposed to protect me, but his love for money had become too much for him. I could have taken my anger out on the sheikh, but he had treated me fairly. Whatever grievances I had with him would be taken care of by karma. The sheikh brought me into his office a few days after my 21st birthday. He was with Saad, who had an envelope in his hands. I thought that I was in trouble because I rarely saw the sheikh. Only his wife knew that I was giving his son my blood. Otherwise, I was just another employee, and he had many of those. In the envelope was a check for a lot of money, travel documents, etc. They let me know that for months he had been in remission thanks to my blood donations and Western medicine. It turns out I had kept him alive and strong enough for them to treat him, so I was free to go home. I had no plan or idea about what I would do when I got there. I decided to deal with it when I got home. After all the formalities were done, they let me go. They said that if they needed me again, I would have to go back, but I have not heard from them ever again. Nor do I want to. When I got back home, I stayed in the capital for a long time, scared to go home. Finally, I got the guts to go back to my village. I did not immediately go home. Instead, I went to the village head, where all disputes within the community are solved. They were very shocked to see that I was alive because my father said that I had drowned in the river. I was shocked to hear that everyone thought that I was dead. I told the head everything that had happened to me, and that it was my father who had organized everything. My entire family was called, including my dad and all extended family members who thought that I was no more. It was a very emotional moment when I was reunited with my family, who were still looking as poor as I left them. Most of my siblings were already married, and my mother's child that I left her pregnant with was now much older. My dad looked like he had seen a ghost, then he pretended as if he was happy to see me alive. But once I started retelling them what had happened to me, my father denied everything. My mother believed me. She had never stopped believing that I was alive. There was a lot of family drama that resulted in fighting and violence. My mother wanted to murder my father for what he had done, and his family said that I was lying. It went on for a long time and the whole village was involved, which was when the truth started to come out. Someone said that he had seen my father fetch me from school in that car, while a man he owed money said that he had gambled and lost a lot of money days after I mysteriously disappeared. He cracked after a while, and said that he had been doing it so that our family would get out of poverty. The rest of the family was angered after his confession because of the shame it would bring to the entire family. We were the talk of the village, and no one wanted to see my father. The family had its meeting where some members defended him, and tried to get me disowned because I had dishonored the family by letting it be a public matter. While I love and embrace my culture, there are some crazy double standards when it comes to elders and their kids. I decided that even if they did not do something to him, I would go after him legally. But I did not want to do that if it meant involving the sheikh's family. I am not stupid after all. The entire family agreed in the end that what my father had done was dishonorable, and had brought a stain upon our family name. His punishment was that he was no longer a part of our family. His banishment did nothing to soothe the ache I had in my heart because of all those years lost. I do not believe that it will ever be okay. For the next 2 years, I got to know my family once again. I moved to the city with my mom and youngest sister while the older one stayed in the village. With the money I had, I invested most of it and started a small business, but I planned to leave the country. I had already started applying for jobs in many European countries and was 2 months away from leaving. Then I would take my mom and little sister with me. My siblings were going to stay and take care of my business, but then, my father's family called one day with shocking news. My dad was sick. I refused to go and see him, even though my mother got emotional and went to see him with my siblings. I told them that even if he was on his deathbed, he was no father of mine. He was asking specifically to see me out of everyone, but I refused to go anywhere near him. Whenever I saw him, I felt both fear and anger. In my eyes, I had no father. I was told that he had cancer of the blood. It was not as severe as the one the Sheikh's son had, but he would need a blood transfusion to be able to live from any one of my siblings, or me. The family pressurized us to forget what had happened and give him a chance to live again. They said that he had been punished enough by being alone. I refused to even give him a drop of my blood. I was a universal donor, but I knew that one of my siblings would be a match if they decided to do it. 3 of them were not a match for his blood type, and 1 flat out refused just like me. I have family members who refuse to even be in the same room together with me, because they consider me a murderer since my blood would have saved my father's life. It is my body and my right to choose what I can do with it. It does not make me responsible for his death. He got worse and worse, and even the blood that was donated by my only sibling who matched his did not help. I do not know if my blood would have helped. After all, it brought Saad from the brink of death, and I do not care. My father got what was coming for him. Even when he was dying, he asked for me, but there was something inside me that could not go and see him and forgive him. His death divided our family more than it had been, and that only increased my hate for him. Even in death, he was so determined to ruin my life. I did not go to his funeral because I had already left the country to go start a new job elsewhere. My mother was not happy about me choosing not to help my dad, but in time we mended our relationship. But she decided to stay back there. She died several years later, and the family did not want me to come to the funeral. I did manage to maintain a good relationship with my siblings, though, while I was working overseas, but I never went back to that country ever again. The only comfort that I have is that the man who sold me spent his last moments suffering, knowing that I could have saved him, but I did not. I mean, how could I save the life of the man who stole so much from me for some money he gambled away in a couple of days? It was pretty ironic, to be honest. Now, here is the end of our today's first story. And in my opinion, her dad was the worst father I have seen or heard of in my entire life. I can't understand how someone can sell their own child just for money, which he's eventually going to lose in gambling. I feel sad for OP, and I am in support of her for what she did. Her father was a burden on the earth. Guys, let me know your opinion about this story in the comment section. I love to read your opinion. So before moving to the final story, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories. Now moving to our final story, which is a small but satisfying karma story, about how OP's BIL ended up losing his life, after he abandoned her sister and nephew for years. Now story. Back in the mid-90s, my sister got knocked up by a guy. She was 17, he was 18. I despised the guy with pretty much every fiber of my being. My mom decided, however, that a baby should know their father, so she invited him to come to live in our house without telling me. Took me a week to calm down enough so that when I eventually came back I didn't punch him when I walked in the door. John was a piece of shit, great artistic talent, but all he did all day was sit out in the garage and do prison tats for people, in addition to stealing mine and my deceased father's power tools and pawning them for a few bucks so he could get some cigarettes. I worked a full-time job and went to school, so I would be gone 12 to 14 hours a day, but it felt like I was pulling into the driveway of a frat house, with a dozen or so people drinking and partying in the garage until I had to leave in the morning. I slowly curtailed that shit by being a giant pain in the ass to all the guests by having their cars towed or their wheels inexplicably slashed. By the time my nephew was 2, I'd managed to put a stop to the 24 hours party zone, but people would still congregate on Saturdays. A few months later I'd had enough and threw John to the curb. My sister's friends all came forward to tell her about how he'd hit on all of them and probably slept with half of them, plus some other skanks he'd meet, all the while professing his devotion to my sister and their child. After I'd thrown him out, John disappeared for 8 years, no idea where, and I didn't care. Then came a court summons for a custody hearing. John was suing for custody. However, in the 8 years since he'd disappeared, my sister had met a guy and they'd gotten married. My nephew was formally adopted by his stepdad and changed his legal name. The first hearing was dismissed because the allegations made as the basis for the custody hearing were investigated by CPS and decided as having no substance. The nephew wasn't beaten, abused, or neglected. House wasn't a disaster and in danger of falling apart, nor was it a health threat. Every few months John would file another custody hearing request until it finally got a date. John made several allegations, all of which were disproven by documentation and fact. Finally, the judge decided he'd had enough and called my 10-year-old nephew up and asked him who he wanted to live with. And what he said was, "I don't know him. He walked out of my life when I was 2. He's not my dad, stepdad is my dad, and he will never be my dad, and I don't ever want to see him again." The judge ruled against John and dismissed his custody request with prejudice. When I looked at John, he was sobbing in his chair as his mother comforted him. I sneered at him and flipped him off as I walked out of the courtroom. As to why John was missing for 8 years, apparently, he'd been committed to a mental facility in Tennessee, and when he got out years later he went on SSI disability, and then plotted various ways to hurt me, my sister, and my mom once he got out. He'd called CPS on us, made several anonymous complaints about drugs and guns, and even called the fire department a time or two. The custody hearing was meant to be the culminating event, but fortunately, John was an idiot, and we had enough money to hire a good attorney. A few years later, John tried to mend some fences with my nephew and invited him to come down to where he lived and meet his relatives, including a half-brother my nephew didn't even know he had. My nephew also has a half-sister, but her mother deliberately excluded John from the birth certificate. This is in addition to the half-brother and sister he has from his mom and adoptive father. Needless to say, my nephew was not impressed by his relatives. Now my nephew and brother-in-law are some serious rednecks, and they both love guns, hunting, camping out, and generally living the redneck lifestyle. But apparently, John and his family took it to some serious extremes. There's a photo I saw one time on the internet with some guy sitting on a toilet on his front porch, and I imagine John and his extended family lived something like that. Only serious and not done as an internet joke. Considering the area, I would not be surprised. When my nephew was 15, almost 16, we received a call that John was dead. Someone had put a gun to the back of his head and shoot him out as he sat on the couch in his mobile home. I felt sorry for John's girlfriend and her son, who found him, but for John, I didn't feel a thing. A journalist tracked my nephew down a few months later and filled us in on some details. Apparently, John had been killed as the result of a murder-for-hire plot. We learned through our own sources that John had been dealing drugs and unknowingly moved into someone else's territory. The would-be drug kingpin paid a guy a few $100 and the promise of an ATV to kill John. Typical redneck retribution, I guess. The journalist asked my nephew for a quote. "Nephew, sure, I wish I could meet the man who killed him." "Why's that?" the journalist asked. "So I could shake his hand. John was never my dad, and I won't miss him." Now that's it for today. Here is the end of our final story. And in my opinion, I can understand how OP's nephew feel. It hurts when someone leaves you in your hard time, and then suddenly came back or tries to enter your life forcefully. OP's nephew was savage as AF, and John deserved what he got. Guys, let me know your opinion about Opus's nephew and John in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.